Oral questions. Questions orales. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, for the second year in a row, the Prime Minister is attacking small business as opposed to large emitters, which will get special deals. SMEs will carry the entire burden of the carbon tax of the Prime Minister. Why? Every time this Prime Minister increases taxes, those who end up paying the most are the people who can do so the least. The Right Honourable the Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, we are proud to reduce small business taxes to 9%. We have the lowest small business taxes in the G7. As for pricing pollution, we know Canadians expect us to take actions to fight climate change, and that's exactly what we are doing, while ensuring that families, small businesses and our institutions are protected during the transition period. That's exactly what we are doing. The Conservatives do not want to act, and they have no plan to fight climate change. The Leader of the Opposition.
Protecting businesses, but it turns out that his carbon tax scheme protects large corporate emitters by giving them a massive exemption from the costs that they'll have to pay. Small businesses who will face rising fuel costs and home heating will have to bear the brunt of his new carbon tax plan. So the question is very simple. Will he grant the same exemption to small and medium-sized businesses that he's given to large corporate emitters?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, that's simply not true. We are moving forward with putting a price on pollution, taking real action on fighting climate change, something that the Conservatives were unwilling and unable to do for 10 years while in government, and evidently continue to be unwilling to do. They have no plan to approach the fight against climate change, will not put a price on pollution. They want to make pollution free again. Well, we, Mr. Speaker, are putting a price on pollution and supporting families so they're actually better off with our plan to fight climate change.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, he can try to deflect attention all he wants, but the facts are in his own government's backgrounder. It says, and I quote, "The federal system has two components, a charge on fossil fuels that will generally be paid by fuel producers or distributors, and a separate system for industrial facilities." Now, that separate system includes a massive exemption. The question again, will small and medium-sized businesses get the same deal?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, if you, like the many Canadians who were watching my intervention yesterday, will see, I predicted that the Conservatives would end up trying to find rhetorical tricks to make this seem very complicated and very difficult. So let's make it very simple. We are putting a price on pollution because we want less pollution, and putting a price on it actually reduces pollution. At the same time, we're putting money in the pockets of Canadians to help them through the fight against climate change, because we know the Canadians expect real action. Real action they are incapable of.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister likes simplicity. Let me make it very simple for him. His own documents show that he has a separate system that includes a massive exemption for large corporate emitters who can afford well-paid government lobbyists. Wow. Small businesses that are the backbone of this economy will face higher fuel costs and higher heating costs. Right. Will those same businesses, this is very simple, get the same deal?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we are taking real action on a plan to fight climate change. Now, Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives evidently, as is their right, as is their responsibility, need to oppose, and that's fine. They will. They will find faults with our plan to concretely fight climate change and support Canadians. The question, Mr. Speaker, is Canadians aren't satisfied with just opposition. They want to know, what is his plan? What is their plan to tackle the greatest global challenge we are facing right now? What is their plan, Mr. Speaker, to fight climate change?
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister will have plenty of opportunities to ask me questions after the next election. But the question He can act all he wants, but he can't act his way out of this one. He has given a special deal to large corporate emitters. Small businesses with 4 and 5 employees will face massive new costs under his plan. Will they receive the same deal that government lobbyists secured for large corporate emitters? Yes or no?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians will be faced with a very simple question over the next 12 months. Do they want to act on climate change and protect future generations or not? It's very clear that the Conservatives are unwilling to take leadership and action on the fight against climate change. We have put forward a comprehensive plan that actually involves a price on pollution and many measures across the economy that will demonstrate that we can not only fight climate change, but benefit Canadians and grow the economy at the same time. They have no plan. We have a strong.
The member for Rimouski, Nejet, Témiscouata, Les Basques. Mr. Speaker, Aboriginal communities and environmental groups in British Columbia yesterday denounced the new Trans Mountain assessment process. They denounced the government's haste, which wants the process to end by the end of February. They denounced botched consultations, which will lead to another botched evaluation. According to the Grand Chief of the Union of BC Indian Chiefs, Stuart Phillip, the new process is worse than the old one. Are the Liberals creating a skewed process to get to yes? The Right Honourable the Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we are following the plan presented by the court in order to move forward in the right way for this project. We know that to move forward, we have to take real measures to protect the environment and to hold meaningful consultation with First Nations. The former government did nothing for 10 years. It was unable to bring our resources to markets other than to the U.S. It's important for us to diversify our economy, and we're doing it the right way. The member for Rimouski, Nejet, Témiscouata, La Basque. 4 months for meaningful consultation? I don't think so. The more time goes by, the more Canadians realize that the Liberals did not negotiate a good agreement with Mexico and the U.S. The price of drugs will go up. Supply management has been weakened again. Steel and aluminum tariffs might not be lifted. Entrepreneurs, workers, and farmers feel they've been left behind by this government. So, Mr. Speaker, why have Liberals rolled over instead of standing up for Canadians? The Right Honourable the Prime Minister. On the contrary, Mr. Speaker, over the last year and a half, we said that we would defend the interests of Canadians above all else, and that we would work constructively and we would be firm. The agreement in principle will eliminate uncertainty for farmers and investors and will improve workers' rights in North America. This means that NAFTA will be modernized for the 21st century, and I would like to thank all Canadians again who stood by us even during difficult times.
A poll this week shows 47% of Canadians feel the USMCA is a disappointment. Liberals can repeat the same tired lines on this deal, but Canadians aren't buying it. Instead of standing strong, they saw their government make concession after concession at the negotiating table. Concessions that have put their jobs in peril. Concessions that rendered their businesses more vulnerable. Concessions that have made drugs more expensive. This is not how you stand up for Canadians. How can this Prime Minister say he is proud of this deal when Canadians are going to pay the price?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, just a few weeks ago, I was meeting with workers who were telling me what a great deal this was, how reassured there was. Where were those workers? In the Windsor area, Mr. Speaker. Folks in Windsor in particular are extraordinarily pleased that we have secured access to the North American market for their jobs, for their industries. We have made sure that we continue to invest in manufacturing across this country, including in the Windsor-Essex area, because we know those are good middle-class jobs that we have protected for generations to come.
The honourable member for Skeena-Bulkley Valley.
No, Speaker, when it comes to recycling, we can all get behind that, but when it comes to the Trans Mountain Pipeline, this Liberal government has taken things to extremes because he's recycling the same broken process that has already failed us. Indigenous leaders, environment groups, local leaders blasted his so-called new pipeline review, calling it rigged with impossible pipelines. Thrown out by the courts, rejected by Indigenous leaders, and a clear threat to our coastline. The only real question is, how much longer will he recycle his flawed, failed, and flagrantly inept process before he just finally gives up on the whole thing?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
On the contrary, Mr. Speaker, we are actually following the blueprint put forward by the court to move ahead with this project in the right way. We understand that moving ahead in the right way means taking real measures to protect the environment and engage in meaningful consultations with Indigenous peoples. Not doing either of those things is why the previous government, for a decade, was unable to get resources to markets other than the United States. We understand the importance of diversification, and we will do it in the right way.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's not just Conservatives who believe that this new carbon tax will be hard on small businesses. Here's what the Canadian Federation for Independent Business had to say about this new tax. He said, quote, "They already picked a fight with business owners with the small business tax changes in 2017, and now it looks like there will be another big one in 2018. This is the Prime Minister that accused small business owners of being tax cheats and who granted special deals to big corporations as he went after small business owners. So the question once again is, will small and medium-sized businesses get the same exemption that big corporate emitters got?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, once again, small businesses across the country rejoice at the fact that we lowered small business taxes to the lowest rate of anyone in the G7. As of this January 1st, 9% will be small business taxes, Mr. Speaker. We support small businesses and will always do so. But we also understand that Canadians are concerned about climate change, about wildfires, about floods, about droughts, about increased hurricane activity south of us. These are the things that worry Canadians. That's why we are taking real action. Unfortunately, the Conservatives have no plan and are not doing anything.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Order.
Well, Mr. Speaker, former Premier Brad Walsh said it best when he said, normally when someone tells you that if you send in money, you'll get more back in return, it's an email from a Nigerian prince. But the bad news for Canadians is that it's actually coming from their Prime Minister. They expect suburban moms and dads to believe that a measly $12.50 a month per taxpayer will cover higher fuel costs and higher home heating costs. Now, if the Prime Minister believes that to be the case, why won't he finally table the documents that show the true cost of the carbon tax for those very same families?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, you'll excuse me, I find it a bit rich for them to be asking us to table documents when they haven't even put forward any plan at all to fight climate change. Canadians expect leadership. Canadians expect action. But you know what? Maybe they...
Order. As one member just said, he couldn't hear a thing. It was very hard to hear the answer, and I'd ask members to restrain themselves. It's important that we hear the questions. It's important that the questions can be aggressive, and the answers as well. Both, those are important. We don't always like what we hear here, but we have to listen despite that, because we're civilized. It's a democracy. Reasonably civilized. How's that? Order. The Honourable Prime Minister has the floor. Right Honourable Prime Minister.
The Leader of the Opposition mentioned earlier that he hopes to be on this side of the House after the next election. The fact is, Canadians will not allow him to get there if he doesn't show real leadership on climate change, on taking the necessary...
Order. Order. The President of the Treasury Board isn't helping. And nor are lots of others. The Right Honourable Prime Minister has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, it is obvious that the Conservatives have no plan to fight climate change. They want to make pollution free again. We are putting forward real and concrete action to help Canadians create the jobs and protect their future generations. This is something that we take very, very seriously. But just like for 10 years under Stephen Harper, they were unwilling and unable to act on the environment. They continue to be unwilling and unable to take on climate change.
The honourable member for Carleton.
Well, now the Prime Minister says that small businesses should rejoice at his tax increases, Mr. Speaker. First of all, they should rejoice, according to him, that he is punishing them for saving money within their companies, that they should rejoice for sharing the work and earnings of their business with family members who contribute. And now he wants them to rejoice that they'll have to pay higher energy costs because of his tax. Simple question. And we'll all rejoice if he finally answers it. Will small businesses get the same exemption as large industrial emitters under his plan?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, unlike Conservatives, we believe that emissions need to go down, and we need to continue creating good middle-class jobs for Canadians and support small businesses. And now, what the Conservatives are saying is factually wrong. We have set a target for industry to reduce pollution, and if they fail to meet that target, they pay the price. If they do better, for example through innovation, they are rewarded. Our plan will also give money directly to households where the federal backstop applies. The only mystery here is, why haven't the Conservatives put forward their plan?
No plan.
The honourable member for Carleton.
Actually, what his own government documents state is that so-called target is a 90% exemption for large industrial emitters. We've simply asked if small businesses will get the same exemption. We have had no answer. And in light of that, he still thinks that Canadian taxpayers should believe that if he puts his hands in their left pocket, he'll give some of it back in their right pocket. Mr. Speaker, his own documents admit the government will collect more in taxes than it gives out in rebates. Isn't that proof that this is just another Liberal tax grab?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
On the contrary, Mr. Speaker, that's simply not true. We are ensuring that we are returning all the money collected from the price on pollution to the jurisdiction in which it was collected. That is a commitment we have made in law. Of course, a law the Conservatives voted against, a law the Conservatives continue to scoff at because they have no approach to fight climate change. They do not think it matters to fight climate change. We'll tell that to folks in BC suffering through forest fires every summer. Tell that to folks in Saskatchewan dealing with floods. Tell that to the droughts people are facing in Manitoba. Tell that to the folks across the country who know that climate change is real.
There seem to be a lot of members who think they can talk in this place without being called upon. There's always the danger they won't be called upon for a while. The member for Carleton has the floor.
Well, listen carefully to his wording. All the money collected from taxpayers will be returned to the jurisdiction, not to the taxpayer. Wow. That is a key distinction. The government plans to spend the money. If the rule here is if Canadians send it, this Prime Minister will spend it. That is distinct from making taxpayers whole for their costs. This will be especially hard for suburban commuters, hockey moms, and middle-class people who will pay more and get less, all so that this Prime Minister can spend it all in the jurisdiction of his choice. Isn't that a tax?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member opposite for allowing me to remind this House that we're actually giving a 10% top-up to small and rural communities because we know that we need to make sure that everyone has the proper support as we move forward with a price on pollution. But specifically, our plan to put a price on pollution will encourage companies to innovate and pollute less while ensuring they create good jobs for Canadians. Our system sets aside $1.45 billion from pollution pricing in order to support small and medium-sized businesses, because we know that small and medium-sized businesses are core.
Honourable member for Carleton.
He's talking about the billions he's going to spend. which is precisely what we predicted. They are collecting this tax so that they can spend it how they choose. In fact, just in Ontario alone, they admit they will collect $1.4 billion more in taxes than they will give out in rebates to individuals and families. That money, that difference, is the net tax grab on Canadians, especially suburban commuters, soccer moms, and average ordinary families. Isn't that yet more proof that this is just another Liberal tax grab?
The right honourable Prime Minister.
I'm afraid I'm going to have to channel my former profession of a teacher when I point out that if the member opposite spent as much time trying to worm around and confuse everyone with our plan and spent it more on developing his own plan to fight climate change, we'd all be better off and he would have something more intelligent to say. Mr. Speaker, we are fighting climate change and we're doing it in a real way, on real terms, because that's what Canadians expect.
The honourable member for Victoria.
The public health emergency caused by opioids is having devastating impacts on our families. Even our life expectancy is declining due to this crisis. The U.S. has already secured criminal pleas, along with dozens of states, over $600 million in damages from opioid manufacturers. Yet the Liberals have taken no steps to investigate potential violations of Canadian law or pursue civil damages. We need justice and accountability. Will the government launch now an investigation into the role drug companies may have played in fueling the opioid crisis in our country?
The honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, we are deeply concerned about the tragic effects that the opioid crisis has had across this country. Our response to this national public health crisis is comprehensive, compassionate, and evidence-based. We're making major investments in harm reduction services and working closely with provinces and territories to support those on the front lines. We're also working with partners to turn the tide of this crisis by committing new resources to improve and broaden access to treatment, by supporting innovative approaches, and from fighting the stigma related to opioid use.
The honourable member for Vancouver Kingsway.
In addition to the devastating toll that opioids are having on families across Canada, our public system has been severely stressed as well. Frontline responders, overdose prevention services, emergency room staff, treatment centres have all borne an enormous cost. And while opioid manufacturers have reaped billions in profits, the public has been left with massive costs from these addictive and dangerous substances. Mr. Speaker, U.S. governments have recovered over $600 million in damages, and British Columbia has just launched a lawsuit to protect taxpayers. Will this government join it?
Right honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, as you know, this opioid crisis is something that affects us all deeply and on which Canada is taking significant leadership, primarily by working with frontline responders and the provinces and municipalities to put forward the measures that they need. We're going to continue to work with the provinces on initiatives that they think can help because we realize the devastating impact on families, on communities, on people right across this country that this opioid epidemic has given.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I want to begin by expressing my heartfelt condolences to the family of Constable Catherine Campbell. She was truly a hero to her community, and we will always remember her contributions and her sacrifice. The government... The government is changing the policy that led to Catherine's killer, Christopher Garnier, receiving benefits from Veterans Affairs, even though he never actually served in the Canadian Armed Forces. But they have refused to intervene and revoke those benefits for Garnier himself. Now, Catherine Campbell's parents are visiting Parliament Hill today, so I wonder if the Prime Minister could explain why he's putting the interests of Catherine Campbell's killer ahead of the interests of Canada's veterans.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, our hearts and the hearts of all Canadians go out to Susan and Dwight and all of Constable Campbell's family. I know that the Minister of Veterans Affairs and the member from Central Nova have reached out and conveyed that to them directly. The Minister has increased the level of scrutiny, and the Department is addressing its existing policy in relation to treatment of family members under extenuating circumstances, such as conviction of a serious crime. This will ensure we continue to support veterans and their families who need our help.
The Honourable Member for Prince George.
Chris Garnier is still in jail receiving treatment that is that veterans and first responders should get. Yesterday, Catherine Campbell's mother said, "I cannot believe that a government would condone a convicted murderer receiving treatment that veterans and first responders deserve." Incredibly, despite their loss and immeasurable pain, all the Campbells want is that our first responders and our veterans come first and get the help that they need, not convicted murderers. Can the Prime Minister look the Campbells in the eyes and tell them why Chris Garnier continues to receive this treatment?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, every member in this House is grieving with Constable Campbell's family. This is a tragic situation, and the Minister has taken steps to address the policy to ensure that this does not occur moving forward. The Minister has increased the level of scrutiny, and the Department is addressing its existing policy in relation to treatment of family members under extenuating circumstances such as conviction of a serious crime. This ensures that we will continue to support veterans and their families who need our help while maintaining the integrity of the system.
The Honourable Member for Red Deer Lacombe.
Mr. Speaker, enough is enough. The family is right here in Ottawa, and they deserve an answer. The real question is, does the Prime Minister think that this murderer should be getting veterans' benefits? And if he does, he should say so. And if he doesn't, he should tell us what he's going to do to stop these payments. Will he finally give the Campbell family and veterans a straight answer?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, what happened in this case should not have happened. The Minister has taken steps to address this policy and ensure that this ceases with cases going forward. But because a veteran is involved, I am not allowed to discuss what benefits he or his family may or may not be receiving.
The Honourable Member for Brantford Brant.
Mr. Speaker, every Liberal in this House voted to maintain the benefits to the murderer, Chris Garnier. Every one of them stood to maintain the benefits. True leaders, when they realize a mistake has been made, correct it. Chris Garnier never served one minute of his life in a military uniform, yet he's getting benefits that veterans are waiting for. This is outrageous, and we demand this government take leadership and revoke his benefits.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, what happened should not have happened. We are ensuring that going forward, these cases will not reoccur. We are changing the policy. We understand how important it is to support veterans and their families, and we're making sure that we do that in an appropriate and responsible way. But because this is an issue that affects directly a veteran and his family members, we will not be commenting on the specifics of this case because we respect the privacy of members who've served in this country.
The Honourable Member for Windsor-Tecumseh.
In January, this government announced that it will establish a Canadian Ombudsperson for Responsible Enterprise, also known as CORE. CORE's job is to investigate the allegations of human rights abuses linked to Canadian corporate activity abroad. But here we are, 10 months later, and that's all that's been done, is that announcement. One meeting, one phone call. No ombudsperson has been named yet, and no mandate yet. Canadians expect our government to uphold corporate responsibility abroad. So when will we see real action on this new human rights watchdog?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it's important to this government, it's important to all Canadians that Canadian companies around the world respect the values and the laws that we cherish here in Canada. That's why we're moving forward on a process to do a better job of holding Canadian companies overseas to account. We look forward to continuing to work with all members in this House to make sure that we're doing it the right way, in a way that will meet the high expectations of Canadians and continue to demonstrate our capacity to create growth and success around the world.
Honourable Member for Timmins, James Bay.
Steve Fobister Sr. of Grassy Narrows died of mercury poisoning. That's a fact. 17-year-old Calvin Copenez died of mercury poisoning. That's a fact. Children who are suffering ongoing mercury poisoning have been denied special education funding for 6 years, and that's a fact. And what's also a fact is that this Prime Minister promised the people of Grassy Narrows that he would clean up that river, quote, once and for all, and not a dime has been spent. So what's it going to take for this Prime Minister to admit that people are still being poisoned and for his government to pay their share to clean up the Wabigoon and English River systems once and for all for these people?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, our government is actively engaged with communities to support their health needs. Last November, we affirmed our government's commitment to funding the treatment centre that the people of Grassy Narrows need and rightfully deserve. We're actively engaged with the community to move them forward. We're working closely with both communities to determine their needs and priorities.
The Honourable Member for Guelph.
Mr. Speaker, our plan to create jobs and grow the middle class with programs like the Canada Child Benefit is working in Guelph and across the country. The latest Stats Canada Labour Force survey showed something I'm proud to share, Mr. Speaker. The City of Guelph has the lowest unemployment in Canada at 3.6%. Can the Prime Minister update this House on more highlights from the latest Statistics Canada Labour Force survey and the success that Canadians across Canada are experiencing?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member from Guelph for his tireless work in his community and congratulate the people of Guelph for the success that they're building. We were elected to grow our economy and support the middle class. The growth in Guelph is just one example of how Canadians are succeeding thanks to our plan. We've been working hard with Canadians all across the country who've created over 500,000 full-time jobs. We know the job does not end here. We will continue to invest in Canadians to grow the middle class and help all those working hard to join it.
Mr. Speaker, on November 20th, the journalist for CBC, James Cudmore, made public the Liberal decision to cancel the contract for Davy. Like magic, 2 months later, he was hired by the Office of the Minister of Defence as a political advisor. My question is simple. Did the Prime Minister or the Office of the Minister of Defence arrange to hire this reporter to make him stop reporting on the Liberals' political interference in the Davy contract? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the details regarding hiring have already been provided to the Leader of the Opposition in the House. We are not going to continue to comment on a matter that is linked to a matter that is currently before the courts. The Honourable Member for Richmond, Arthabaska. Mr. Speaker, we just asked when James Cudmore received a job offer to work for the Office of the Minister of Defence. No answer for 3 days. We asked if it was to prevent him from continuing to report on the Liberals' political interference in the file of the contract for Davy Shipyard. Still no answer. Mr. Speaker, this reeks of Liberal scheming. What is the Prime Minister hiding? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, details regarding this hire have already been provided to the Leader of the Opposition. The Opposition is simply trying to pursue a matter on the floor of the House of Commons, and we are not going to comment on a matter that is currently before the courts.
Mr. Speaker, I believe the question that the government was asked to answer was the date on which the offer was made, and that's the information that we will continue to seek. Now, Mr. Speaker, right after swearing in 2015, the Cabinet and the government set up a secret Cabinet committee. And in the secret Cabinet committee, it had one purpose, and that was to stop the procurement of a Navy vessel. Now, interestingly enough, Mr. Speaker, in their attempt to cover it up, they are now denying documents for a fair trial. In the spirit of Access to Justice Week, will the Prime Minister release these documents?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, these employment details were already provided to the Opposition House Leader. The Conservatives are simply trying to indirectly prosecute an ongoing court case in this House. We will not comment on an ongoing court case.
The Honourable Member for Milton.
Mr. Speaker, what I'm looking for comment on is the reason why the Prime Minister is withholding documents for a straight-up defense of a person accused of a serious crime. Now, if he won't tell us who he's protecting, maybe I can surmise that it was the President of the Treasury Board who did receive a letter from Irving asking for his intervention. But I also note, Mr. Speaker, that the current Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs did not post his conflict screen until 3 months after the secret Cabinet meeting. So I'm wondering, Mr. Speaker, is that who the Prime Minister is protecting?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, the member opposite, and indeed the Conservatives in general, used to understand that you cannot comment on an ongoing court case. That is why they cited that rule in this House over 300 times when they were in government. We respect the independence of the judicial system, and we will not comment.
The
Honourable Member for Salaberry-sur-Roi. Mr. Speaker, there are 40 Liberal MPs for Quebec, but they are clearly not listening to Quebecers. Opposition to Energy Est is nearly unanimous, but when the Conservatives promised to bring it back, the Liberals left the door wide open. To actually be heard in Ottawa, do you have to be a lobbyist for the oil industry? How much does it cost to buy the attention of an opposition leader or a prime minister? $1,500 for a private dinner? Because that's pretty cheap to threaten the main source of drinking water for all of Quebec. The Right Honourable Prime Minister. I encourage members of the NDP to follow the news and to look into the rules that we set up for public funding. We are open and transparent with regard to all political donations. Why are they still hiding behind their secret fundraisers? We need more transparency as we are demonstrating ourselves. We are always open to investments, but they must follow the right procedures. That's what all Canadians, including Quebecers, expect. The Honourable Member for Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie. I know a bunch of Quebecers that are going to be worried about the Prime Minister's answer because they want to defend our rivers and our access to drinking water. Mr. Speaker, we need to bring out the big guns to fight climate change, but the Prime Minister is just pulling out his slingshot. As for the Conservatives, they're missing the mark and have declared war on Quebec by promising the return of Energy East. We're in trouble. The Liberal-Conservative Coalition for Pipelines could not care less about the environment. What I want is for the Prime Minister to say here and now that he will commit to never bringing back the Energy East pipeline. Does he have the courage to do that, or is he the puppet of the oil lobby? I encourage members to be careful in their commentary and to avoid the appearance of insult. The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the NDP has a great deal of rhetoric but never acts. We've set up a concrete plan that is going to achieve the greenhouse gas emission targets because we're putting a price on pollution. We understand that we have to create jobs and a greener and more prosperous future for all Canadians. That's exactly the balance that we show that we've understood. We've heard from Quebecers and Canadians. The NDP, for their part, are still setting the economy and the environment against each other, which doesn't work for all Canadians or Quebecers. The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, I'll ask my question differently. We're not talking about the case of Vice Admiral Norman. What the Conservatives want to know is if the Prime Minister hired the reporter, James Cudmore, so that he would stop informing the public of the maneuvers of the Liberal government against Davie Shipyard. The Right Honourable Prime Minister. The Honourable Member for Durham.
November 4th, the Liberal cabinet was sworn in, and within days, they were trying to change the Davie contract. CBC journalist James Cudmore wrote 3 stories on this controversy. The last one was on December 21st, and January 8th, he left his job with the CBC. The Prime Minister is trying to be cute here, Mr. Speaker. On what day was James Cudmore offered a job, and who in his office offered that job? Was it on Christmas Day? Give us the day, through you, Mr. Speaker, when James Cudmore was offered a job.
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as I said, employment details have already been provided to the opposition House Leader. The Conservatives are simply trying to indirectly prosecute an ongoing court case in this House. We will not comment on an ongoing court case.
For Durham. Order.
Mr. Speaker, if the Prime Minister suggests he's provided that information, we're suggesting he has not, I would ask him to table the documents they've shared on what date he was offered a job, Mr. Speaker. What is really concerning about this is the James Cudmore stories led to a Privy Council investigation in January. That investigation revealed 6 separate leaks and 73 people that knew the details of the Liberal cabinet meeting. I want the Prime Minister to tell this House how many of those 73 were Atlantic Liberal MPs.
Right, Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we respect the independence of our judicial system. It is out of respect for that independence that we will not engage with the Conservatives' prosecution of this case on the floor of this House. It would be inappropriate for me to comment on an ongoing court case. The Conservatives well know that because they made that clear over 300 times when they were in government.
The Honourable Member for Brampton South.
Mr. Speaker, October is the Breast Cancer Awareness Month, and rightfully so. As we know, across Canada, 1 out of 8 women will receive the diagnostic of breast cancer during her lifetime. Research is a key. And my question for the Prime Minister, can the Prime Minister inform this House of the action taken by the government regarding breast cancer?
Good question.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, I thank the member from Brampton South for her hard work and her advocacy on this important issue. Thousands of Canadians have joined walks in their cities and communities, with many others who have also been impacted by breast cancer. This month, let's all learn more about breast cancer, starting with prevention and screening. We recognize the importance of research and support organizations like Canadian Partnership Against Cancer, with close to $50 million annually. To all survivors and families who've lost loved ones, we will not stop until we find a cure.
L'honorable député de Mégantic-L'Érable.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is a good actor, but a very bad negotiator. Just ask dairy, egg, and poultry farmers in Quebec and Canada who were sacrificed at the negotiating table with the United States. The President of Dairy Farmers of Canada was clear. We fail to see how this deal can be good for the 220,000 families who depend on dairy for their livelihood. A good negotiator prepares. A good actor rehearses. Can the Prime Minister tell us which studies he used to decide to abandon Canadian farmers? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the agreement with the United States and Mexico preserves and maintains supply management. Its future is no longer in question. When it comes to markets, we promised farmers that they would be entirely compensated and fairly compensated. The changes made are similar to those of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which was celebrated by the Conservatives. Supply management is protected. Farmers will be compensated. As always, the Conservatives are just playing politics.
Okanagan, West Kootenay.
Mr. Speaker, this spring there were 2 significant sulfuric acid spills from transport trucks in Trail, BC. Over 1,000 cars that drove through the spills had to be written off because they were unsafe to drive. And the Trail Fire Department lost 2 of their trucks. A smaller spill happened again in September. Regional authorities are deeply concerned that Transport Canada does not have the staffing capacity to effectively deal with incidents like this. And is Transport Canada investigating these acid spills, and what enforcement actions will they take to resolve the issues faced by local residents and governments?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, obviously we take this situation seriously. This is something that, of course, Transport Canada is looking at. We know the protection of communities right across the country, protection of citizens is one of the fundamental responsibilities of any government, and one which we take very seriously.
L'honorable député de Laurentides-Labelle.
Mr. Speaker, as member of Brock, I'm proud of the work that's been accomplished on updating our Elections Act. As part of the review of the Chief Electoral Officer's report after the 2015 election, the committee published 3 interim reports that include some recommendations. We are pleased to have completed clause-by-clause study and to see the bill return to the House this week. Can the Minister inform the House of measures that our government is taking to follow up on its commitment to reinforce openness and fairness in Canada's democratic institutions? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. I would like to thank the member for Laurentides-Labelle for his work on the Procedure and House Affairs Committee. This bill follows up on more than 85% of the recommendations made by the Chief Electoral Officer. We're going to improve transparency, make voting more accessible, and protect Canadians' privacy. While Conservatives had removed the right to vote from many Canadians, we believe that our democracy is better and stronger when more Canadians can participate. That's exactly what we are going to do, Mr. Speaker.
For Milton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On May 3rd of this past year, I rose in the House to ask a question that was supposed to be asked by our colleague, Gord Brown. And I wanted to know whether or not there was going to be compensation for the forgotten thalidomide survivors coming from the promised spring budget. The Prime Minister said on that day we will have more good news to share shortly on this issue. They're still suffering, Mr. Speaker, so I'm following up on the question today. When will the Prime Minister do the right thing and honor the word he gave us on May 3rd?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians who suffered from the ill effects of thalidomide are of real concern to all of us. That is why we stand united in wanting to do right by them. We are working with them, ensuring that it actually gives them the proper support.
The Honourable Member for Regina Louvain.
Mr. Speaker, with climate rebates, the Prime Minister has offered more money to Saskatchewan people, but our Premier has responded with no problems. A solution would be to extend the federal carbon price to the carbon content of imports from countries that do not price emissions. Will the Prime Minister enact a carbon tariff to ensure a level playing field for Canadian workers and to collect more revenue which could fund greater rebates?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, for 2 years we worked with premiers right across this country, including the premiers of Saskatchewan, to establish a way forward on putting a price on pollution that would fight climate change and support families through this important transition in our economies. Unfortunately, Saskatchewan and other provinces decided not to move forward with a concrete plan to fight climate change, and therefore we are moving forward with our national plan.
Alors, je voudrais signaler aux députés
I'd like to signal to members the presence in the gallery of Canadian astronaut David Saint-Jacques. Mr. Saint-Jacques will be taking off to the International Space Station in an upcoming mission.
Point of order, the Honourable Member for Grant Prairie Mackenzie.
Mr. Speaker, coming out of question period, I do have a point of order. The Prime Minister stood in his place and declared that on some previous date, the Prime Minister's office had contacted the House Leader's office to tell her office on which day James Cudmore was offered a job. I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, that is unequivocally untrue, and I'd ask the Prime Minister to table the evidence.
Thank you, Member. This sounds like debate. Tabling of documents. Allowed. I ask members to take their conversations into the lobbies or elsewhere. Tabling of documents. The Honourable President of the Treasury Board.
Mr. Speaker, a message from Her Excellency, the Governor General, signed by her own hand.
Her Excellency the Governor-General transmits to the House of Commons the Supplementary Estimates A of sums required to defray expenses of the federal public administration for the fiscal year ending March 31, 2019, and in accordance with Section 54 of the Constitution Act 1867, recommends these estimates to the House of Commons, October 22, 2018. Son Excellence.
Her Excellency the Governor-General transmits to the House of Commons the main estimates A with the necessary funding for the public administration for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2019, and pursuant to Section 54 of the Constitution Act 1867, recommends these estimates to the House of Commons on October 22nd, 2018.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Pursuant to Standing Order 36(8), I have the honour to table in both official languages the government's responses to 3 petitions.
Dépôt de projet de loi émanant du gouvernement.
Introduction of government bills. Statements by ministers. Reports from interparliamentary delegations. Presenting reports from committees. The Honourable Member for Toronto Danforth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have the honour to present in both official languages the 14th report of the Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage, entitled Bill C-376, an act to designate the month of April as Sikh Heritage Month. The committee has studied the bill and has decided to report the bill back to the House without amendment.
Here. Member for Battle River Crowfoot.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have the honour to present in both official languages the 52nd report of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts, entitled Report of the Message of the Auditor General in the 2018 Spring Reports. Pursuant to Standing Order 109, the committee requests that the government table a comprehensive response to this report. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Introduction of private members' bills. First reading of Senate public bills. Motions. Presenting petitions. The Honourable Member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to be able to table today a petition signed by thousands of Canadians drawing attention to the plight of Afghanistan's religious minorities, in particular the Sikh and Hindu communities. This petition calls for the government to do more to advocate with her Afghan counterpart for the rights of these minorities, and it also asks the Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship to use the powers granted him to create a special program to help persecuted minorities in Afghanistan. The community here in Canada is ready to sponsor these communities. It's been 3 years. It's time for action. Thank you.
Honourable Member for Windsor-Tecumseh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I too rise with a petition on behalf of concerned Canadians that are raising awareness about the urgency of the situation of minorities from Afghanistan. They urge this government to act with special and existing programming to address the plight of these people that do need our help urgently today. And so I'm tabling this with thanks to the member from Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan, for his initiative in organizing us all together to make this very strong statement with the avenue of petitions.
Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's an honor to rise in this place today and to present a petition from thousands of Canadians who are deeply concerned about the plight of religious minorities in Afghanistan, particularly Hindus and Sikhs who have been subjected to significant persecution. The petitioner specifically asked that the Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship create a program that will enable these persecuted minorities to find refuge in Canada, and they further asked the Minister of Global Affairs to raise this issue internationally and to pressure Afghanistan to respect human rights. I also wish to thank the honourable member from Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan, for his fine work on this issue. Member for Milton.
We would like to present a petition signed by thousands of concerned Canadians regarding the situation in Afghanistan with respect to Sikhs and Hindus and their difficulty in having sponsorship here in Canada. Mr. Speaker, this petition is calling upon the Minister of Immigration, Refugee and Citizenship to use his powers to create a special program to help persecuted minorities in Afghanistan, and also asking the Minister of Global Affairs to raise this issue that is so very pressing.
For Markham Unionville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I too have a petition signed by the thousands of Canadians asking for the government to do more for the plight of the Afghani Sikhs and Hindus. Mr. Speaker, at one time there was over 200,000 people lived in Afghanistan, and now they've gone down to less than 1,000 people. We are asking the government to do more to bring them back to the country. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The member for Kitchener-Conestoga.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a petition here signed by many residents of Canada that are drawing attention to the House of Commons that at one time Sikhs and Hindus of Afghanistan numbered in the hundreds of thousands, and today less than 5,000 remain. They're calling on the minister, pointing out to the minister that he already has the power by legislation to allow vulnerable minorities to come to Canada as privately sponsored refugees directly from the country where they face persecution, and they're further urging the minister to raise the persecution faced by this community with their Afghan counterpart and to strongly advocate for more to be done to protect them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Peace River Westlaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I too would like to raise my voice and present a petition. The people that have signed this petition are stating that the Sikh and Hindu communities of Canada are ready to sponsor people from Afghanistan. Sikh and Hindus have been persecuted in Afghanistan.